You're traveling through the unknown, a journey beyond the corners of reality, where the shadows whisper and the chill runs deep. Welcome to the dimension where your deepest fears are given form. This is The Midnight Mystery.
Welcome to The Midnight Mystery. This episode is called The Sketchbook of Horrors. In each episode, we delve into the shadowed corners of our existence, bringing you tales of the eerie, the uncanny, and the downright terrifying. From the realms of the supernatural to the depths of the human psyche, no stone is left unturned, no dark secret left hidden. As the clock once again draws near midnight, prepare to embark on another adventure into the uncanny, the eerie, the horrifying, the midnight mystery. The paint-splattered walls of John's tiny studio apartment seemed to echo his despair. Desperate to break through his creative slump, he decided to wander through the city, hoping to find some inspiration. His wandering feet led him to a narrow cobblestone alley where a quaint antique store nestled between modern glass buildings. The bell above the door chimed as he stepped inside, inhaling the smell of old books and aged wood. Among the various trinkets, a weathered sketchbook with a beautifully embossed cover caught his attention. Despite its age, the paper inside was pristine, crisp, and untouched, eagerly awaiting the first stroke of an artist's hand. Entranced, he bought it without a second thought. Back in his studio, John felt a fresh wave of inspiration. He picked up his charcoal pencil and began sketching, losing himself in the mesmerizing dance of creation. He thought of a woman he had once dreamed about, a woman of ethereal beauty with cascading raven-black hair and sparkling emerald eyes. His hand seemed to move of its own accord, the woman's face taking form on the page. As he finished sketching, he leaned back, surprised at the depth and realism in his drawing. He had never drawn something so captivating before. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew through his apartment, flipping the sketchbook's pages and extinguishing the candle he had lit for ambiance. In the dim light of the moon pouring through the window, he could see a figure emerging from the shadows. Blinking in disbelief, he watched as the figure materialized into the woman he had just sketched. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. She turned to him, her eyes shining just as he had imagined. "Isn't it obvious, John? I am Evelyn. But how? I drew you." She smiled, crossing the room to stand before him. "And here I am," she said, placing her hand on the sketchbook. "It seems that this is not an ordinary sketchbook, John." John was in awe, torn between his disbelief and the tangible proof standing before him. This is impossible." "Is it?" Evelyn asked. "Art has always been a medium to bring imagination to life, has it not? It seems that with this sketchbook the line between imagination and reality blurs." The room fell silent as John tried to comprehend the impossible happening in his apartment. The truth was there, staring him in the face, a product of his own creation. And as unbelievable as it was also wonderfully inspiring. With a newfound resolution, John looked at Evelyn, then down at the mysterious sketchbook. "Well then," he said, picking up his charcoal pencil again, "let's see what else we can create." The night was still young, and the blank pages of the sketchbook were waiting. The struggling artist had found his muse, and he was ready to take on the world, one sketch at a time. Little did he know that his life, and the lives of those around him, were about to change in unimaginable ways. The moonlight streaming through the window of John's studio apartment bathed Evelyn in a soft, ethereal glow. Her features, identical to the sketch in John's sketchbook, were enhanced by the dim light, making her seem even more surreal. John sat silently, watching her as he tried to reconcile the impossibility of what was happening. "John?" Evelyn said, breaking the silence. "Are you all right?" John glanced at her, then at the sketchbook lying on his table. "Am I dreaming?" he asked, his voice shaky. Evelyn laughed softly, her eyes sparkling. "No, John, this is real as the sketchbook that created me." A strange calmness washed over John. He looked at his sketchbook again and felt a sense of power surge within him. He was no longer just a struggling artist. He was a creator of life. After a moment, he turned back to Evelyn. "I suppose we need to get you some clothes," he said, offering her a small smile. In the days that followed, John became increasingly absorbed in his sketching. Every stroke, every line brought a new creation to life, a houseplant, a cup of coffee, a pet cat named Daisy. But none were as extraordinary as Evelyn. She was the epitome of a dream come true, a walking piece of art. Evelyn's presence fueled John's creativity, sparking a drive in him that he had never felt before. Life had become an open canvas, ready to be painted with the colors of his imagination. One evening, as they sat on his apartment's small balcony overlooking the city, John turned to Evelyn. "Evelyn," he began, "I want to introduce you to the world." "The world?" she echoed, looking at him curiously. "Yes," John replied, "as my girlfriend." Evelyn smiled, her eyes sparkling under the city lights. "I'd like that, John." In the weeks that followed, Evelyn was introduced to John's small world, his friends, his favorite coffee shop, his preferred art galleries. The story was simple. Evelyn was an old friend who had recently moved to the city. Everyone was taken in by her charm, her elegance, and most of all by the way John's eyes lit up when he was around her. John and Evelyn became a constant fixture in the city's art scene. Their story spread, the tale of the struggling artist who found his muse and his love in the same person. John's art began to garner attention, his creations reflecting the joy and exhilarity he felt in his life. Yet with every sketch that came to life, with every drawing that breathed its first under his pencil, John could feel a subtle undercurrent of unease. As wonderful as his newfound ability was, he couldn't shake off the feeling that he was toying with a power he didn't fully understand. "John," Evelyn said one evening, noticing his silent contemplation. "What's wrong?" He looked at her, the living testament of his incredible gift, and smiled. "Nothing, Evelyn. Everything's perfect." Yet, even as he said the words, he couldn't help but feel a lingering sense of dread. Unbeknownst to him, his fears were not unfounded, and the line between his art and reality was about to blur even further. The art community in the city had been taken by storm. John, once a struggling artist, was now the talk of the town. Each painting, each sculpture, each sketch he created was met with applause and admiration. And at the center of it all was Evelyn, his stunning muse, and the liaison between him and the world. "John, the gallery owner at the West Street Art Hub is asking for more of your work," Evelyn said, looking up from her laptop one morning. John glanced at her from across the table, his sketchbook open before him. "All right," he replied. "I'll have something ready by tomorrow." That night, John found himself drawing a cafe scene. A small, intimate space filled with people engaged in quiet conversations, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. He put the finishing touches on the sketch as dawn broke, a sense of accomplishment filling him. The next morning, news spread quickly of a mysterious cafe that had appeared overnight in an empty lot. Word traveled fast, and curiosity drew locals to the quaint establishment. John and Evelyn decided to visit the cafe. Walking in, John was struck by a chilling sensation. The patrons, they were eerily familiar. Each face, each figure, mirrored the sketches from his cafe scene. Only, they were grotesque, their expressions twisted in haunting grimaces and gaunt complexions, much like specters of his creation. "Why do they look like that?" John whispered to Evelyn, the color draining from his face. "I'm not sure," Evelyn responded, her voice shaky. "It seems the sketchbook didn't just create. It distorted." The haunted cafe soon gained a reputation around the city. Locals spoke in hushed whispers about the ghostly patrons, and soon the police launched an investigation into the cafe's mysterious appearance. "Mr. John, are you aware of the strange occurrences at the new cafe?" Officer Anderson, a seasoned member of the city's police force, asked John during a routine inquiry. John swallowed, glancing at Evelyn before replying. "I've heard rumors, yes. Do you know anything about it?" Anderson probed further, his eyes stern. "I'm afraid not, officer," John said, a lie sitting heavy on his tongue. "It's just as baffling to me." As the officer left, John turned to Evelyn, panic clear in his eyes. "Evelyn, what's happening? Why did the people in the cafe turn out like that?" Evelyn took his hand, her grip comforting. "I don't know, John," she admitted. "But we need to be careful. This sketchbook, it's not as simple as we thought." Their world, once filled with excitement and creativity, was quickly becoming a nerve-wracking puzzle. With each passing day, the lines between reality and art blurred further, pulling them into a web of chaos they hadn't anticipated. As the mystery around the haunted cafe deepened, John realized he was in the eye of a storm that was just beginning to unfurl. The pressure was mounting, the city was on edge, the police were incessantly probing, and John was at the center of it all. He tried to put his pencil down, tried to resist the pull of the sketchbook, but like a moth to a flame, he was drawn back again and again. Evelyn, who had once been warm and comforting, was changing too. A cold, distant aura enveloped her, and she grew increasingly inscrutable. Her encouragements for John to continue sketching felt less like reassurances and more like commands. One evening, John sat hunched over his sketchbook, an image of Albert Dufresne, a well-known art critic who had recently given John a scathing review, taking shape on the page. His pencil moved feverishly, every line and shadow on the critic's face captured meticulously. "John!" Evelyn's icy voice cut through the tense silence of the room. "Don't you think it's time you showed Dufresne what you're truly capable of?" John paused, looking up at her. "What do you mean?" Her lips curved into a chilling smile. "Just finish the sketch, John." When news of Dufresne's sudden disappearance spread, whispers began to grow louder. The critic had last been seen criticizing John's artwork, and now he was nowhere to be found. The police were back on John's doorstep, their questions more pointed, their suspicions evident. "Mr. John, when was the last time you had contact with Mr. Dufresne?" Officer Anderson asked. John faltered, his mind racing. I haven't spoken to him since he reviewed my work." "And what did you think about his review?" Anderson probed further. "It was harsh," John admitted, "but everyone's entitled to their opinion." As the days passed, John's unease grew. The scrutiny from the police, the rumors circling him, and Evelyn's strange behavior were all taking a toll on him. Then, just as suddenly as he disappeared, Dufresne was found. But he was no longer the critic everyone remembered. He was gaunt, his eyes empty of their former spark, a ghastly caricature of his former self. The image was horrifyingly similar to the sketch in John's sketchbook. John could feel the walls closing in. The reality of what his sketches were capable of was sinking in, and he couldn't shake off the feeling of dread that was creeping over him. The police were closing in, and John knew he couldn't evade them for much longer. "Evelyn," he said one night, his voice barely a whisper. "What have we done?" She looked at him, her eyes devoid of warmth. "No, John, not we. You." The truth of her words struck him like a blow. He had unleashed something terrifying onto his city, and now he needed to find a way to put it right. As he looked at the sketchbook, the root of all his problems and all his power, John knew he had a daunting task ahead of him. The atmosphere in John's apartment was heavy, the tension between him and Evelyn almost palpable. He couldn't ignore the truth anymore. He had become a puppet in Evelyn's hands, his art a tool to wreak havoc. "I won't sketch anymore, Evelyn," John declared, his voice steely. Evelyn looked at him, a mocking smile playing on her lips. "And why's that, John?" "Because I see what's happening now. The haunts in the city, the transformations. It's not the sketchbook, it's you." For a moment, Evelyn said nothing. Then she laughed, a chilling sound that echoed in the small apartment. "Well, it took you long enough, John." "Why, Evelyn? Why do all this?" She shrugged, her icy eyes on him. "Why not, John? This city, it needed a shake-up." "I won't let you use my sketches for your games anymore," John said, determination burning in his eyes. With that, he picked up his sketchbook and began to draw, his mind swirling with an idea. His pencil moved with purpose, sketching the intricate details of a complex maze. He worked feverishly, pouring every ounce of his skill into creating a labyrinth that would trap Evelyn and the other sketch-turned ghouls. When he finally finished, he turned the sketchbook around, showing Evelyn the maze. Her eyes widened as she looked at the drawing, realizing what John had done. "What is this, John?" she asked, her voice a mere whisper. "A trap, Evelyn," he replied, his voice firm. "A trap for you and all the others." As the words left his mouth, the sketchbook began to glow. One by one, the ghouls he had unknowingly brought to life began to dissolve, their forms turning into smoke before being sucked into the sketchbook, disappearing into the labyrinth he'd drawn. Evelyn, too, found herself unable to resist the pull. With a final, piercing look at John, she too vanished into the sketchbook. John stood in the now silent apartment, his heart pounding. He looked at the sketchbook, its pages now just a normal sketchbook, the maze its final masterpiece. He'd managed to undo the chaos he'd unwittingly unleashed on the city. As the maze materialized within the sketchbook, John could see the shadowy forms of his creations being pulled into it, disappearing from the city one by one. The apartment grew quiet, save for Evelyn's desperate pleas. "John!" she cried out. "You have to stop!" John turned to her, fear and determination warring within him. "Why, Evelyn? Why should I stop? You didn't!" A flicker of panic crossed her face, and she blurted out, "Because I was just like you once. I was an artist. I used the sketchbook, and I suffered the consequences." But before John could comprehend her confession, the sketchbook began to tremble in his hands. There was a deafening crack, and the pages containing the maze ripped apart, releasing all the ghastly sketches back into the world. "What? What happened?" John stammered, dropping the sketchbook as if it had burned him. He turned to Evelyn, but she was already disappearing, a look of despair on her face. "I'm sorry, John," she murmured, just as she was absorbed back into the sketchbook. Then, all hell broke loose. John's sketch-made creatures didn't just return. They were unleashed, driven by a vengeance that echoed in their horrifying cries. They surged into the city, causing panic and chaos in their wake. They didn't just haunt anymore. They hunted. The city descended into a nightmare, and John, the unknowing architect of its doom, found himself the prime target. He tried to escape, but wherever he went, his sketches were there, and one by one, they exacted their revenge. John's end came in the form of his first creation, Evelyn. He found her standing in his apartment one night, her beautiful figure now a distorted, ghastly sketch. Her cold eyes bore into his. "You did this, John," she whispered, her voice echoing around the room. I didn't mean to," John pleaded, but Evelyn didn't respond. She just stared at him, her gaze cold and unfeeling. John's world faded into darkness, Evelyn's haunting figure the last thing he saw. His talent, which he thought was a gift, had become his undoing. The sketchbook had claimed its final victim, leaving a city reeling from its nightmarish creations. In the end, John's art lived on, not as a testament of his talent, but as a chilling reminder of the horror it had unleashed. I hope you enjoyed our episode. I'd like to extend a heartfelt thanks to you, our brave listeners. Your presence in this shared journey into the unknown is what fuels our stories. Your fascination is our motivation. Did this episode send chills down your spine? Leave your comments, share your thoughts, your theories, your own midnight mysteries. Your feedback is the beacon that guides us through the uncharted territories of our stories. And if you haven't already, remember to subscribe to our channel. By joining the Midnight Mystery family, you won't miss out on a single chilling tale. As a subscriber, you'll be the first to know when a new episode lurks around the corner, ready to pull you back into the shadowy depths of the unknown. This is the Midnight Mystery signing off, leaving you with a simple reminder. When the clock strikes 12, fear the silence, for that's when our tales come to life. Good night, Midnight listeners, and remember, not all who wander into the dark are lost.